You gave an interview at the weekend that caused a lot of anger. You said that young people who are considering emigrating because of the extortionate housing costs could find the grass is always greener. You said if they go to a successful, busy city, they'll find the same high rents as here. But the rents could be lower if they went to a very rural area or a third or fourth tier city. Taoiseach, do you actually know that we have the highest housing costs in the entire EU? In fact, housing costs here are an astonishing 88.5% higher than the EU average. So unless you consider places like Paris and Rome fourth tier, the reality is you really don't know what you're talking about. Since you made those comments, young people living abroad have reacted with utter astonishment. The Irish Independent today has interviewed 5 young people living all over the world who were stunned by your remarks. 24-year-old Evan McLaughlin said he has doubled his standard of living and halved his living costs by moving to Barcelona. 22-year-old Caitlin Grant is doing a master's in the Netherlands, and her rent in a house share is €365 a month. Meanwhile, the Group Chat podcast was inundated with young people living abroad who were outraged by what you have to say. One contributor living in Berlin said the latest housing innovation in Dublin is shed sits. Sheds where the rent is more than €1,000 per month, and I could go on. Taoiseach, we know from the latest Daft.ie report that the average rent across the country is nearly €1,700 per month and a staggering €2,300 in Dublin. Those prices are unaffordable to 90% of workers, and that's a fact. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Because your government has made a lot of promises when it comes to housing, and you've broken almost every single one. House prices are higher than they've ever been. Rents have never been higher. Homelessness has never been higher. And we're dreading the updated homelessness figures tomorrow, which are likely to show another record increase. Men, women and children growing up increasingly in homelessness. So Taoiseach, on every metric when it comes to housing, every objective metric, your government is failing, and you're failing miserably. No amount of gaslighting by you or other ministers is going to change that. Taoiseach, yesterday you talked about a whole of government approach being needed to tackle this housing crisis. And you said it's the role of the Department of Taoiseach to drive that forward. Taoiseach, given that you'll soon be Taoiseach and leading that department, can I ask you a few questions on your approach? What specifically will you be doing as Taoiseach to drive the government's response to the housing crisis? What will you be doing? What will you expect from other government departments to address the housing emergency? And when can we expect to see results in lower homelessness and more affordable rents and housing prices? And are you saying that the current Taoiseach, has not been doing enough in terms of delivering on housing?
Thanks, Deputy. I don't think it's correct to say what you said about every metric, and I'll just mention two as you raised metrics. We anticipate this year somewhere between 20 and 28,000 new homes being built. That doesn't include derelict homes being brought back into use. It doesn't include student accommodation. So roughly 28,000 new houses and apartments being built in Ireland this year. That's the highest in 10 years, and we need to increase that figure again next year. And also, and this is probably the most encouraging metric, although we've a long way to go, is that in the last 12 months alone, 16,000 individuals, young couples, have bought their first home. And that's the highest in 15 years. And 15 years is a long time. Just in the last month, over 2,000 young people, individuals, couples, got mortgage approval. So those are at least some of the metrics that are at least going in the right direction, although by no means far enough or fast enough in my view. I think the Taoiseach is doing an excellent job, and I think Minister O'Brien is doing an excellent job too. But I do believe it is the role of the Taoiseach to coordinate government action and to accelerate government action. And I absolutely want to see Housing for All implemented, and I want it implemented as fast as possible. And part of the role of the Taoiseach, no matter who it is to make sure that the whole of government is seized of the housing crisis and prioritises action and solutions, because the Department of Housing and the Minister for Housing can't do it on their own. It requires the Department of Public Expenditure to do the right things. It requires the Department of Finance to do the right things. It requires other departments as well to play the role they need to play, particularly in relation to the provision of infrastructure to service sites, and that's the impetus that is happening and needs to continue. You mentioned high rents. What are we doing in relation to high rents to help people who are renting? Three things. First of all, we're scaling up cost rental, a new form of housing initiated by the last government but being realised by this government, where the government provides rental properties to people who don't qualify for social housing at a below market rate. Something that works very well in a lot of European cities, only getting started here in Ireland, but I think is definitely going to be part of our housing mix into the future. The second is a tax credit for people who are renting. And that's going to be more than people think it's going to be, because it's being paid for 2 years, this year and next year. So that's going to be €1,000 into the pocket of a single renter in a few weeks' time. For a couple renting, €2,000. For 3 people sharing the same house, 3,000 among them. So in the vast majority of cases, that'll be the best part of a month's rent back into your pocket, and that's not insignificant. And we've also introduced the rent pressure zones. And I think it is useful to look at the Daft analysis in detail. And that shows that for the vast majority of renters, maybe 75% of renters, those who are existing tenants, rents rose by 2.5% last year, not 14% or 10%.
Didn't hear what the approach was going to be, and I think you need to tell us what that approach is going to be. What difference will it make? Do you know, Taoiseach, that the commencements are down 30% in the last 3 months? And only yesterday there was a report about a reduction in the number of mortgage approvals. So, you know, that's not a metric I want to see. So I want to know what you mean by the difference that a whole of government approach is going to make. There's a huge number of planning permissions that are not being activated, and that is, you know, that only increases the value of the land without actually seeing delivery of housing. I think on Saturday we're going to see quite a lot of people out on the street with the Raised Roof rally, which will be taking place in Dublin, starting in Parnell Square at 1 o'clock. And I think you'll see that because people have been pushed to the point where they have lost hope. And do you regret, Taoiseach, making those comments that were so ill-informed and have so angered people who can clearly show that they're not true?
Thanks, Deputy. I think I referred to two cities, house prices in Sydney, where the average house price is $1 million Australian dollars, and rents in New York. You've represented what I said in a way that wasn't said, and certainly not the way I intended it. Deputy, I believe Ireland is a great country in which to live, and that's not just my opinion. The United Nations, which assesses these things objectively, puts Ireland in the top 10 countries in the world in which to live, out of 200 countries in the world. Everyone's lived experience is different, and people travel abroad for all sorts of different reasons. And I wouldn't discount for a second anyone's lived experience or dispute the examples that you gave earlier. But I don't think any individual's lived experience is everyone's. And I have to look at things in the round. And I see a country that has thousands of people coming here every year from England and Europe to live. People who are European citizens of 27 countries to choose from, and tens of thousands come here. Even if you narrow it down to Irish citizens, more Irish citizens return home every year than leave. Might not be true every year, but it is true for most of the years in the last few years.
Thank you, Tom.
How does that fit in with your narrative, Deputy?
Thank you, Taoiseach. Thank you, Tom.
Of course it does. Everyone's experience is different. Everyone's
Thank you. I Tommy Bugger Ryan ish. Guji and group Tommy Bugger Ryan Guji.